violence, we can talk about several different forms of violence. And the first would be internal violence, internal to a Shibono. And this may arise over disagreements over women, a person being stingy, insults that are thrown from one person to another. And these sorts of internal tensions generally increase the larger the size of a Shibono. So a Shibono starts off with 100 people, let's say, and over time it grows, 150, 200, 250 people, and the tensions grow and grow and grow. And eventually, a portion of those people will split off and form a separate Shibono. But in these internal disputes, which may be over women, over stinginess, over all these sorts of things, they start off with verbally assaulting one another, and this can escalate into chest-pounding duels. And it's not unlike grade school kids who will hit each other on the shoulder as hard as they can until the other person says uncle. Except these are done with clubs, and they will actually hit their opponent in the chest as hard as they can. And if they hit hard enough, it will force all of the air out of their lungs and make the person pass out. And then their opponent has won. So they start off arguing. If they can't settle their disputes through verbal arguments, they will start with these chest-pounding duels. And if that doesn't settle it, they will move on to club fights or axe fights. And they have these clubs, and they're about 10 or 15 feet long, and they'll hit each other with these long wooden poles. And if it doesn't stop there, if they want to escalate the violence a little bit more, somebody will run and get an axe, and they will fight with these axes. Now, they normally fight with the blunt side out, so it doesn't actually kill people. Occasionally they'll turn it around, and if they kill someone, that raises the level to a whole new stage of violence. If a death occurs, it has to be avenged. But normally they'll fight with the blunt side out, and again they will hit people until someone finally backs down. There's a famous film by the filmmaker Timothy Ash which looks at one of these axe fights. So you have internal disputes within a Shibono, and then you have external disputes between Shibonos. And these, they may be based on the same sorts of issues. Fights over women, raids to steal women from other Shibonos, fights over garden lands, and so forth. And these they start off as raids. They start off as raids usually, and they will raid another Shibono and steal some women, maybe steal some food, and then go back to their own Shibono. And then this raid will have to be reciprocated by the other Shibono, who will then in turn raid them. And they will go back and forth with these raids, and if it gets bad enough, they will escalate this to killing wars, where one Shibono will actually invade another, kick them out of their land, kick them out of their Shibono, and take over their land. Now, in this context of violence and warfare, alliances are very important for Yanomamo Shibonos. Villages are constantly fissioning. When they get too big, parts will break off and establish a new Shibono. And all of the Shibonos in Yanomamo land are enmeshed in this constantly shifting web of alliances, setting up alliances between the Bishashi Teri and the Makoto Teri against the Batanawa Teri, for example, constantly setting up alliances which both serve as alliances during warfare, but also as a security net. An economic security net. If you get kicked out of your Shibono by an enemy village, you have somewhere to go. You can go live with your allies for a while, use some of their land to grow your crops on, and so forth. And as I've said, as military allies in the field as well. Now, Chagnon describes, let me give you an example of a typical war that Napoleon Chagnon describes. This took place in 1964 when Chagnon was just starting his field work, and men from one village, Manau Teri, came and they stole 7 women from another Shibono, another village, Batanawa Teri. So the Manau Teri come and they steal 7 women and they take them back to their own village. Stealing women is not uncommon in Yanomamo society. They would be integrated into the new Shibono. They would take on husbands there and could live a pretty normal life as members of this new Shibono. But such a raid cannot go unanswered. And so the Batanawa Teri retaliate by going to Manau Teri and taking back 5 of these women. They go into the Shibono, they raid the Shibono, and they're able to get back 5 of the women and leave, but they're not able to get the last 2. And they're not able to get the last 2 because they're not willing to escalate this into a killing fight. And again, remember, if they kill someone, that raises things to a whole new level, and every death has to be avenged by another death. And so the Potawatomi go to Manauteri, they get 5 of these women back, but they're not willing to kill to get the other 2 women back. And so the Manauteri realize that the Potawatomi are a little bit scared. They back down here. So they take advantage of this, and then they raid and kill the headman of Potawatomi. And then a death has occurred, and so the Potawatomi have to take vengeance on that death. And so then they raid and kill the headman of Manauteri, and it goes back and forth. And over a period of a year, 8 people end up getting killed in these raids and fights. Now, in warfare, in working themselves up for warfare, the Yanomamo they try and work themselves into a frenzy to get themselves psyched up to go out and kill other people. So they'll construct an effigy, for example, of the enemy, and they'll stab it with spears and shoot it with arrows. They'll do dances until late at night, and they'll sing these chants. One of my favorite chants is, I'm meat hungry, like the carrion-eating buzzard, I hunger for flesh. And so they'll sing these chants and work themselves up into a frenzy and then go out on these raids. When a man kills another man in Yanomamo society, he takes on a special status. And this is called unokais, a killer. A man who has killed another person is called an unokais. And when they come back from a raiding expedition in which they've killed someone, they have to go through a ritual cleansing process. And they come out of this cleansing process with this honorific title of being an unokais. And the unokais are very highly valued in Yanomamo society. They have 2.5 times more wives than the common Yanomamo man. They have 3 times more children than an everyday Yanomamo person, and they're venerated in daily society. 40% of adult Yanomamo men are unokais. They've killed at least once, and the more often they've killed, the higher their status in Yanomamo society. 25% of adult male deaths in Yanomamo land are due to this sort of violence. Now, Chagnon argues that this violence reproduces itself. Perhaps there's a genetic propensity for aggression. And if so, these men have 2.5 times more wives, 3 times more children. This genetic propensity would get passed on in greater frequencies to the next generation. Or even if there's not a genetic propensity, they're being raised, their father figure of young boys, the children of unokais, would be this especially fierce man. And so they would learn to imitate that as well. And so this fierceness plays upon itself and builds on itself and reproduces itself over time. Now, there's a controversy about why the Yanomamo are so fierce, why they go to war so often. One argument is that it's about protein, that protein is fairly scarce in this area, they highly value meat, and that thus they fight over hunting grounds, for example. And the main proponent of this is an anthropologist named Marvin Harris. And he's an arch materialist. He always looks for a protein argument to explain religion in human society. So, for example, he has argued in the past that Muslim and Jewish taboos against eating pork are related to the desertification of the Middle East, and that raising pigs was no longer ecologically feasible, and thus the religion developed a taboo to enforce this ecological necessity. He's also argued for the Aztecs, building on the archaeology of Michael Harner. He's argued that the Aztecs had no big sources of protein. There were no horses, there were no cows in the New World. They had turkeys, they had dogs, they had ducks, but no big sources of protein. And the Aztec Empire at its height was enormous. In the basin of Mexico, there were 1 million people. And so Harris has argued that the Aztecs became cannibalistic to have a source of protein, that they would go on these raiding expeditions, capture enemies, bring them back to their capital of Tenochtitlan, sacrifice them, rip out their hearts, and then roll the bodies down these enormous pyramids